All right, should I start the introduction?
Sure, go for it.
All right. Hello, everyone. This is the Church of Logic. I'm Cody Rue, and I'm with Dominik Kirst once again. I'm delighted to have him back. And Dominik is in Germany right now. Where are you exactly?
Yeah, hi guys. I'm in Saarbrücken, which is my hometown, close to France.
Yes, a lot of logic in Saarbrücken, and yes, Dominik is a particular expert in the subject of today, which is the second incompleteness theorem. I'm pretty excited to talk about this one. It's arguably, um, along with the first incompleteness theorem, the most important theorem in mathematics. Certainly, one of the most important theorems in logic. Top three for sure. So I think I'll let Donig talk about this a little bit because he really knows it quite well. So what does the basic theorem state?
Yeah, so the usual statement, if you don't take it too formally, says that formal systems of a certain strength cannot prove their own consistency, where consistency means the absence of internal contradictions, kind of the property that the system makes sense in only deriving reasonable theorems. And the most informal formulation, or if you take a particular system like arithmetics, then you could wonder whether such a system is able to show that it itself is free of contradictions. And now Gödel's second incompleteness theorem is kind of a no-go result. It says all interesting systems have the property that I cannot prove their own consistency.
Right. And I can't help I guess we didn't discuss this beforehand, but I can't help make a digression into like the historical significance of this, right? Because
Mm.
um yeah, early, late 19th, early 20th century, people had sort of figured out how to express these logical systems and famously had gotten a couple wrong, right, where they were contradictory. And so now people are a little nervous, right? What does it mean to be consistent, right? And these systems had different sort of philosophical underpinnings. They weren't all obviously consistent. And so it was this important question of like, can we bootstrap, our belief in mathematics? And in particular, can we prove that these really strong systems that we're using that talk about infinities, are those consistent? And Gödel's theorem is kind of a no-go for these. And this was a huge crushing kind of defeat
Mm.
to this whole program of like understanding why all of mathematics is consistent, right? Is this completely like unknowable, which I think is why the theorem is so uh, intense, right? It's intensely debated within philosophy because it really tells you thou shalt not prove the consistency even of yourself, right? It's worth noting, like, let's see, this is not entirely obvious, but if you can't prove your own consistency, then you definitely can't prove the consistency of a significantly stronger system, right? Because if you could prove, from system A, which is like simple and believable, uh, if you could prove consistency of system B, which is much stronger, then in turn, system B could prove consistency of system A. And then you could sort of say, oh, but now if I go full circle, A has proven its own consistency. And Gödel's theorem says you can't do that. So certainly you can't go from A to B because you know you can go from B to A.
Mhm.
I'm not sure I explained that very well, but basically the program wasn't take simple systems and prove their consistency. It was take simple systems and prove consistency of much stronger systems. So that's not possible. Uh, and the incompleteness theorem that we talked about last time with Dominic was, okay, if you have one of these systems that has sufficiently strong arithmetic and is consistent, and we had a slightly stronger property there. There's at least one sentence. There is some statement that you can't decide, that you can't prove or refute. But here we're saying concretely, here's one of those statements, and it's consistency. Sorry, I rambled on there for a little bit.
Maybe
What
one
what
thing I can comment on that already is that um, I was confused by that for a while, thinking that consistency is an example for all the systems you find incomplete in the sense that they have independent sentences, but it's even a bit more tricky, which makes it funny. So there are systems that are consistent, but prove their own inconsistency. So it's not always the case that these systems or that incon or consistency statements are examples of independent statements, but at least for all the systems that behave reasonable in a sense, and we have called that property soundness in the previous episodes. In these systems, you have that the internal consistency statement is an example of an independent sentence. But the second incompleteness applies to more systems than just the sound systems. And there is even a small difference between independent sentences and the mere unprovability of consistency. So,
right?
not sure that makes things clearer than that, but
I myself am trying to conceptualize that. So there are systems that are confused in some sense. They're a little bit silly, and they believe strange things about natural numbers and about statements of combinatorics. And one of those silly things they might believe is that they themselves can prove false, even though from the outside you can see that they can't prove false, right? So internally, their vision of what you can prove is wrong from the outside perspective, right? So you're saying there are such systems. However, there are no systems which internally know that they can't prove false.
mhm.
Even the silly ones, nobody knows that they can't prove false.
Yeah, yeah, and
If
that's
they are, if they are, if they actually can't prove false. If they can prove false, then yeah, sure, they can prove everything, including that they can't prove false.
yeah, and I find that is a very fascinating situation, and it maybe explains the difference of these two properties that play a role, which the one being a very strong one, soundness, meaning a system is not confused, it just proves reasonable things, actual things about the nature numbers. And then the much weaker property of consistency, which says the system can be arbitrarily confused. So it can prove very weird things about natural numbers, but still it doesn't prove conflicting things of natural numbers.
I
But it may
see.
well behave completely different. And consistency is a much weaker property, and the second incompleteness theorem is mostly about the consistency statement, which was connecting back to this historical hope of Hilbert's program. The property people were after, they wanted to put mathematics on formal groundings and correct foundations, and the least you want to have is consistency in the form that you cannot derive any contradiction.
Yes, yes. I think now that we've opened this can of worms, I feel like we could do a whole episode where we just talk about this foundational program and to what extent it's been successful. Um, but let's have that full conversation at a later time, I think. So okay, so we're reaching time for this episode. Next time, how about we remind briefly what the first incompleteness theorem is, because we're going to need it to explain how it can be the case, right? How could you possibly prove that a system can't prove its own consistency, right? That feels like you're in dangerous territory of what you're able to prove in terms of things not being able to prove, right? But we'll see, right? The first incompleteness theorem, we explained clearly what it was. We're going to remind, our listeners what it is, what it states exactly. And we're going to show how we can use that first theorem in order to prove the second theorem.
Mhm.
All right, let's call it for this episode and take care, and I'll see you next time.